Now there's been a swing, thankfully, over the last decade to ensure that accreditation is about ensuring quality, but not just ensuring quality education, but educational equity. That's through fair practices standards, and then promoting innovation. So we've seen that evolution over time, going from the old Appendix G for those paramedic program directors out there that remember that, to our student minimum competencies that are really about the floor. And actually, the word innovation is in the standards, but nowhere in there does it say how to do that, how you meet the standard. It'll give you examples, but that's where academic freedom and creativity come in. But they all connect. So I think it's important that we make the connection between standards of practice and education.
You're listening to Cold Press Conversations with Dr. Jewel White Williams, a lover of numbers, lists, and a good glass of cold press juice, who is sharing episodes each week to help you explore the back end of healthcare and health sciences, where a lot of that grit is done. We'll dive into topics covering research, education, and clinical practices, as well as guest shows with other leaders in the field. Pull up a seat and let's dive into these amazing and game-changing conversations.
The student feedback, the early and mostly direct, not surveys, when I first started full-time, and I started doing a lot of the traditional lecturing, here's the chapter stuff. I mean, you come in, it's like, here you go. There's your classroom. And so you're like, okay, I'll do what's easy. I've got these things that are here and I'll just read through them until 1:00 in the morning and make sure I've got my organization right. And then we'll start. And very early on, like first week of class, I had an older student come up to me and say, that was 5 hours of talking. And I was like, not used to that at all. I knew I needed help. I needed to like really start thinking about it. But what I was intimidated by is they handed me a class of 40 people from tech, and I was like, how do I do this? So I started worrying about this. I started taking all kinds of workshops through college. I took this one again in 2003. So online then was just brand new, called Active Learning Strategies for adult and adolescent learners. And what I loved about it is every week you'd report and the instructor was there. And actually it wasn't on camera. It was all just online. So we're typing back and forth. It's messaging back and forth, but you had groups. And our groups would come up with an exercise. Hey, I'm going to try Jeopardy this week. I'm going to try jigsaw learning. We'd pick something from this book and we'd try it. And then we go that week and try it in our class. Then we come back and we talk about which worked and which didn't, and each one would have feedback. And I focused on how to do things with large groups because at that time I had very little help. And then I had to turn that into telling my college, I need more resources so that I can break people into groups. Then I remember very clearly taking a workshop that Dave Page was running. And I can't remember if it was through NEMC or what. It was a workshop though. And he and Heather Davis were talking about working in large groups and doing things like breaking groups up and rotating them into different rotations and monitoring those rotations. And I started doing that and I started reading more on best educational practices. At that time, clickers were common in lectures. So there was clickers. Now there's 100 other things to get people engaged.
Kahoots amazing too, yeah.
Yeah, so Kahoots and clickers and all of that kind of stuff, getting people really engaged. So I started to learn to do that, but I still saw if you have a large group like that, there's going to be some people you're losing. I'm not satisfied. I still am not satisfied with, well, there's always going to be some attrition or whatever. I'm never satisfied with that because people don't get that far without wanting to be there. So, it's not like they're just sampling. They really want to be there. If they've come through the EMT and the prerequisite and the application, I have to assume they want to be there. So each and every person deserves that attention. I've never been satisfied with, so many of them are going to be weeded out or whatever. I think that's baloney. That was kind of like, how do we get to everyone? It's still like the thing. Well, how do we get to everyone and how do we keep them there? I mean, if they choose personally, look, you know what? I have too much going on in my family right now. And you talk to them about that. I've had talks with students where they've said to me, there's so much going on right now. I don't know if I should stay in the program. And I've had discussions with them about how sometimes your cohort can help and talk them into sticking around. Hey, census is not for a couple more weeks. You have time before you can drop and still get a full refund if you're paying for it. So talk to them about that. They might stick it out. And every so often you have a student that's like, I am so glad I stuck it out because my cohort really helped me. I was starting to go through a divorce and a custody battle, and they really helped me emotionally, and having this time to spend on it helped me. And so they stuck it out and they stayed. And then I've had others where it just was too much. They had maybe a sick person they were taking care of, and then they return. Maybe they return 2 years later or a year later. The open door part of it, I think, is really important for them to know you don't have to finish. You don't have to do this now. It's okay. It's education, and you want to be present as much as possible.
Right.
So,
right.
But I think, when you said challenging norms in education, I think what has been a norm is a culture around the bell curve. There's going to be some that are going to do great. There's going to be some that are not going to do great. And that's a system we set up. It doesn't have to be that way. We can use mastery learning. We can use simulation-based mastery learning. We can use competency-based learning so that everyone actually meets it, but they do it at a different pace. We don't have to do it where we say, here's the start, here's the stop.
Right.
It's more challenging because of the system we built. That's why it's challenging. We built the education system to run like this, whether it's a college or an agency. We built it like that to say, this is what you have to meet. You have to meet it in this time, the end.
It's the honest truth. I speak to several educators, not as often as I once did, but when I do speak to them, many still feel it's just that still. Yeah. But it's not. It really isn't. And it lets you know who's willing to make additional progression. And I say that, not speaking ill of anybody, when you are taking the intent to learn other ways, that's part of your growth in education. That's why I say you should always be at a point where you're ready to learn. Not everybody who is teaching is at a point of being ready to learn.
I love what you're saying there, because you're talking about the educator, not the student. And that's the other thing, is I think we need a lot more conversation about us, about the educators, not the students, because the knee-jerk response is always going to be to blame the student. Well, they're not spending enough time. They're not motivated. They're not doing this. They've got an attitude. Whereas then we can't kind of stop and think, how am I going to handle the situation? What am I bringing to this? What background did I have? What biases do I have in looking at the student? All of those things as I go to say, what is it I can do to help this student get to the point where they will be a safe, good quality paramedic, someone who I trust with patients.
That's so true. And we know we don't have enough time within the classroom collectively, no matter what you're teaching, because there's a curriculum and the curriculum still moves forward. But really understanding your learner will help the process of whoever's in your class.
Yeah.
And it's difficult. Don't get me wrong. I have had classes that are 40 plus, not intentionally. It's just the way it worked. Yeah. Until they could find somebody else to split it up if they could, or there's some other changes. But it takes time to understand that learner.
It does. I think you were talking about this has been the way it is, that you have this many students in this much time. But why it is that way, I think everything comes down to money. It really is about money. It's like, how do we pay teachers if we're not paying them hourly or by load of a course? And the course is this long. How do we do this? It literally has to be picked up and dumped on its head, the whole concept. And I think it's starting, but it's starting sort of in areas I'm a little nervous about, these kind of pop-up education places that are charging people and saying, we'll get you there, and it's mastery learning, and you have, a certain amount of time and whatever else if you pay this money. And, maybe it'll turn out to be something. But I think it's good that they're challenging the status quo, because the status quo needs to be challenged right now. If we really are serious about educational equity, and if we're really serious about health equity, health equity begins with educational equity, and that's being ignored right now. Yes, that's being ignored right now. They're starting too far into the path. First of all, it's been drawn in society. We know that, all of the inequities are built into systems that we've developed. And so then it's about, okay, we know the system that we're working in. We can work on the larger societal issues and the changing issues. But as students are coming into a system too, an educational institution, whether it's an agency or college or whatever, it's built into that too. So we have to know that we've got inequities and processes we have built in that guarantees that someone's not going to make it, because there are people that are learning, they're on a slope, but they don't get to that above 70 at the time that we say they need to. And so they wash out. If they're resilient, they try again somewhere else. And maybe they need a couple of times to do it. Oh, God, this one makes my skin crawl when I hear people say, maybe they're not cut out for this profession.
Oh,
That makes my skin crawl, which means automatically in that saying, maybe someone's not cut out, that you have a preconceived notion of who is. And if we do that, then we're treating people that come in all shapes, sizes, flavors, colors, backgrounds, everything else, ages. And our practitioners, we're saying they have to be this person here, of this type that we've developed. That's really sad.
No, you just nailed something right
There's
there.
so much more to that. But I think it begins there. At health equity, we talk about, disparities in treatment way out here in the field. That begins with us teaching those things into people. Like Dave Page, I remember he did a presentation on how we teach error into our students. It's very true. And I think the medic mindset, Ginger Locke talked about that. We teach error into our students sometimes by allowing certain practices to occur in simulation, by, not correcting certain things that they're doing along the way, not using deliberate practice, effortful practice, that kind of thing. And so those errors will perpetuate over time. Teaching them to be lifelong learners will hopefully make them continue to learn. If we don't embed that in them continuously, then we build that error into them, that they won't become lifelong learners, and therefore their skills and everything else deteriorate. So there's all kinds of little things that we teach. We have to be mindful. Are we teaching error into our students? But equity is one of them. Are we teaching stereotypes? When we look at our simulations, when we have students develop simulations, do we ask them the question, is there anything embedded in this that tells you something about your own feelings about a patient population, about a scene? Is there anything that is revealing to you about your own biases, or whatever you want to call it, your notions of what the patient, quote, deserves, or whatever? Just to have students even kind of check themselves. And educators, like you said, having educators check themselves, that's a huge piece of it. When I'm developing this, am I looking at it with a team of educators? Am I talking to some people from other departments about these? What do they think of this simulation we've developed? Are they going to look in and go, whoa, that's crazy. You have this situation going on? That doesn't seem like it should be right. So
I don't know if it's the norm or not, but it tends to be. I've always been one who says, look at what you already have within your talent. Everyone has something that they can offer to that talent. So like when we were building our curriculum when I was in pre-K 12, some people had the talent of understanding the outline, creating it from top to bottom. They had the full picture, backwards by design. They just had it. But then some people had the knack for creating the lesson plan. They could take it from that next step to create that lesson plan and allowing it to build even further. So I also look at this collectively. If someone actually is a leader in something and they have the background of maybe public health, or they have the background of education leadership, or they have the background of, we're just going to say this, endocrinology, and you're building a platform to teach people about the misconceptions of how diabetes may be out there. Look at all of those people who are there, those 3 or 4 people. You could probably build a beautiful curriculum as opposed to just one person just looking at it.
Yeah.
Because that way you're taking it from all those resources and looking at it. It helps. Endocrinology, that's the diabetic part. Person who's public health, that talks about how they focus on the community part. You have your educational leader, the person who understands curriculum. And so if you have those 3 people working together, can you imagine a curriculum that could really serve the community and teach that student?
Having a person from public health, I think, is absolutely key. A lot of times they've got a background in kind of societal issue. Well, they do have a background in, the kind of sociology of the human condition and the health impacts on different communities. I think really the missing piece has been not having public health experts. Having a paramedic who took a class in public health is not sufficient, in my opinion. I mean, I guess it depends upon the person, but having the public health input as part of the team, like you said, having a team approach, I think is definitely the way to go. We talk about in terms of our simulations, but also feedback. Here's one of the issues that occurs. You can have guest speakers and you can have simulations and you can have deliberate practice, mastery and learning. You can be using best practices in lectures, short lectures, interactive, case-based, all of the things. And you're promoting health equity, and you're promoting these different aspects of interviewing patients and looking at environmental and social situations and everything else. They're eventually going to end up in the clinical setting and in the field. And sometimes that work is rapidly undone. And that can be very frustrating. So I think that piece of it, recognizing that the education program is not just the lecture slides, the simulations, and the case studies, it's the entire piece. So getting the whole team on it, including the preceptors who are going to take them in the hospital and in the field. Because otherwise what happens is you hear, that's the way the book and the classroom told me. This is real. This is the real setting. And unfortunately, we know from research that the real setting, we're seeing big time disparities, not great treatments in all cases, and some areas where we know we can be better, whether it's a clinical practice or readmission reduction, that kind of thing, whether it's community paramedic type stuff, or whether that's what we think of as regular scope of practice of a paramedic. We can always improve in that area.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I know I have to say thank you. We didn't even hit our questions. We had some really good stuff. We really did. One thing I do want to hit on, you're a part of the board of advisors for the UCLA Pre-Hospital Care Research Forum, right? You're serving as a site visitor for co-AEM EMSP.
Yeah.
And you indicate a commitment to advance in the field continuously. How do all these roles complement the vision that you may see for the future of research and education and clinical practice in EMS?
Yeah, I love this. This is a really great question. It kind of goes with what we were talking about maintaining accreditation standards, which I think is an interesting way to put it, balancing it with innovation, when really I think that question kind of goes to this one.
Okay.
We have to stop thinking about accreditation as a bureaucratic exercise. And I think that's one of the problems. There's a lot of reasons for that too, that built over time. If you pay attention at the national level of education, you know things about the history of like the Spellings report and the push to, hey, accreditors need to be more strict. And that was in the mid 2000s. So they became more strict. There was this backlash of, wait a second, this became bureaucratic box checking. Now there's been a swing, thankfully, over the last decade to ensure that accreditation is about ensuring quality, but not just ensuring quality education, but educational equity. That's through fair practices standards. And then promoting innovation. So we've seen that evolution over time, going from the old Appendix G, for those paramedic program directors out there that remember that, to our student minimum competencies that are really about the floor. And actually the word innovation is in the standards, but nowhere in there does it say how to do that, how you meet the standard. It'll give you examples, but that's where academic freedom and creativity come in. But they all connect. So I think it's important that we make the connection between standards of practice and education, National Registry, COA EMSP, the states, COA and KHEP actually is your accreditation. National Registry is your certification, verification of competency. Your state is where you get your license or certification to practice. So those three are going to need to be like this. They have to be connected. They have to be talking to one another. We get the vision of practice, the practice analysis, and we feed that back out there. And then I think the educators need to become educator researchers, action researchers.
Wow.
So every year at the community college, I do program review. It's part of a requirement, but it's also a chance for us to collect all the student learning outcomes information, who's meeting the outcomes. We can disaggregate those outcomes, look and see our students with financial need meeting the outcomes the same as those without. We can kind of look at how we're serving our population. We put it together in a program review that's required. Well, that's the same as what I need to report in accreditation. It's the same thing. So we don't do disaggregated outcomes in accreditation, but outcomes from students, you just merge those things together. And then it promotes this continuous conversation. And then all the best practices that are going on that people are sharing, like at the National Association of EMS Educators, that needs to drive education practice more. So I think at the COA, there's a program directors group now that's advising the COA EMSP and advising the board. I just joined the board about a year and a half ago. NEMC is my sponsor, and being part of that has been really educational. But I think it's got to be driven by the people that are doing the research and the boots on the ground kind of education with the students, but also collecting that information, that data from the classroom on best practices, but on outcomes too. So I think our outcomes reporting, I'd love to see it get more specific and more disaggregated so we can see when it comes to the workforce, do we have a pathway to the workforce that allows all who want to become paramedics to actually move along that pathway? Because I think that's educational equity. And if you have educational equity, I think health equity will follow. So, I think that's sort of a natural progression. I know that's sort of pie in the sky, but I think that's,
No.
focusing on just continuous educational research from the different networks of educators out there. I'd love to see more networks of educators. I think a couple years ago, Erin Donathan from Pima Community College at that time, she did a project on virtual simulations versus regular simulations and outcomes. And she recruited several colleges. Our college was one of them. She recruited, I think, a dozen different programs. And actually, it was not just college programs. There were other programs, 12 paramedic programs at least. And we all participated in this one-day study where half of our students did virtual simulations. The other half did the same simulations in live form. And then she did a follow-up, the impact on critical thinking, and published that as a paper. And that did accomplish two things. One is she had a publication that was really important about the use of simulation and how, innovative use of teaching and learning critical thinking and clinical decision making and clinical judgment, which is right now at the forefront of National Registry. But the other thing it did was it showed that you could get a network of education programs together to do this research. And that's what we need. That's what we need. We need a network of education programs to continuously, not here and there on special project, continuously do this type of research. So that, I think, what's going to get us to really drive not only the education programs, but the profession forward.
Okay, so I got to bring this up. I know I used your time, but I was on LinkedIn. You and I talked about how we kind of are addicted to LinkedIn. But no, because there's a lot of good information out there.
There is.
And that's how I learned, like sometimes the studies come across. I'm like, oh, wow. And actually, when you're talking about the virtual simulation, I'm wondering if I read that study when I was trying to go for my dissertation. So it sounds very familiar. I was like, I've read a lot, but that sounds very familiar for one of the papers I read. But what I was getting at, I saw someone publish something on LinkedIn, and it mentioned taking a BLS provider, person who has an EMT, and it was a 16-hour course in Florida where they gave the EMT for 16 hours an opportunity to see what it's like to be an advanced EMT. And they didn't call it the advanced, but to see what it's like to be in that realm for being a paramedic, what an AEMT does. And one person said, isn't this AEMT, the advanced? And I didn't comment back because I was like, let me just sort of think about it. I know some people who would like to have, and this goes back to what you're saying, and get a study on it to find out how many people who were in this 16-hour course decide to progress for their A or their P.
Oh, yeah.
Based off of how well that program works. But it allows the person who has curiosity to see whether or not that's the direction they want to go.
And follow up on that question, the people who choose not to, why don't they? So that's the other thing, is to know, like, is it successful in either way? Because maybe it helps somebody save time and effort and say, you know what, that 16-hour, that made me decide I really don't want to do that. So that's a success too, because they actually chose what they wanted to do. And then to follow up and see if they felt that was a good decision. That would be really interesting. I think we spend a lot of time saying success is doing this, defining success for people. And that their definition of success may be different than what we have made up.
Yes. And that's what made me think about it. I was like, you know what? There's so many people who have that curiosity. It's piqued their curiosity, whether or not they wish to move up the chain or go to another direction. Because I'm meeting EMTs all over the place, different ages, different backgrounds. And one said, you know what? I've decided not to go the progression of paramedic. I've decided that I'd rather go into radiology. Based off of, just my curiosity, waiting, that's the direction they wish to go. Some people go into nursing. Some people say, hey, guess what? I'm going to back off. I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of my information. I'm going to go ahead and get some more coursework. I'm going the PA route. You just never know. And I thought that course was just amazing.
Yeah.
There's something about it. Even though it's 16 hours, I know it has some similarities to an A or P course, but it could give so much information, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't see that on LinkedIn. I'll have to look
at it. Yeah. I liked it. I didn't comment. I almost want to write and learn more about it. All right. Before we go, I got to ask you my favorite question. If you were to get a cold pressed juice because it gives me your personality.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
What would it be and why? What kind of cold pressed juice would you have?
Is there any juice that you can't have? I like the mixes. I like the mixes like with a little bit of tropical,
Okay.
a little mango pineapple.
Mango
But then I
pineapple.
like a little carrot thrown in. Psychoanalyze that, Dr.
Right,
Jewel.
right. You enjoy
I
life?
like the adventure, but I like it to be safe.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll go zip line as long as I know there's a net below me. As long as I've done a safety check.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah. But I'm not going bungee jumping or what's the other one?
Right.
Space jumping. No. I have a line.
Yeah, there's certain things I just stop.
Yeah.
I lived in an area where they used to jump out of the plane.
Oh, yeah.
And I was just so enamored. I was like, oh, this looks so great. And then for some reason, it just clicked. And I was like, is this for me?
Do you know what's worse than that? I have a daughter that wanted to do that on her 21st birthday. I can't remember when I drove her out there to do that, going, oh, please. And to watch your child go on a tandem, you're like,
They do tandems.
Yeah, she did a tandem. And then, of course, she loved it. And then I was like, I was hoping she would probably not like it. She loved it. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate everything. I think we had a phenomenal conversation. Going to spark a lot of questions to people, and hopefully it will allow others to look into motivational learning, active learning strategies, being an education researcher, looking at when we talk about boots on the ground, what about boots on the ground education?
Yes.
Outcomes from students. I love that one because that's huge. Looking at the teacher. You and I talked about that. And then the simulations, equity and stereotypes, teaching errors, looking at virtual simulation and how we can look at research collectively, discharge plan. We talked about so many positive things.
Mastery learning. Yeah. You could have a whole session on mastery learning and competency-based learning and credit for prior learning. And yeah. So many things out there that we need to kind of open up in the education world.
Yes. And I love education. It allows us to expand who we are and become better at what we do. I really do. So thank you so much, Dr. Corry, for everything. You've been a delight. I really thank you. May you have a wonderful day.
You too.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Cold Press Conversations. If you love this episode as much as I did, I need you to head on over and subscribe so you never miss an episode. This is Dr. Jewel signing off to health and cognitive happiness.